My name is Evelyn Monroe. I'm 28 years old, and last year I died. Well, technically I didn't, but for a full night the people in white coats didn't expect me to make it. They huddled outside my ICU room, speaking in clinical whispers about intracranial pressure and skull fractures. Monitors beeped. Tubes tangled around my arms. My face was swollen and unrecognizable. My brain was bruised, but I was still there, silent, trapped, listening. Someone had called my emergency contacts. Clarence and Ivy Monroe arrived just past midnight. I didn't see them, of course, I couldn't move, but I heard them. Heard the way my mother's heels clicked too fast on the tile. Heard my father ask the neurologist, "What kind of expenses are we talking about here?" There was a long pause. The doctor, Dr. Kwan, I'd later learn, answered carefully, "We need consent to operate. There's a high risk of secondary brain injury without intervention." "Are you her legal guardians?" My mother's voice dropped an octave. "That's complicated." "She's not biologically ours," my father clarified. "The paperwork was never really finalized." A lie. The adoption had been legal for over 20 years. Dr. Kwan hesitated. "But she listed you both as emergency contacts." "She's not our responsibility." Ivy said, her voice sharp as frost. "We did what we could, for years. But we owe her nothing now." That's when I knew I wasn't going to die. Not because of medicine, not because of miracles, but because I refused to let that be my ending. A few hours later, Nurse Celeste placed a call to Noah, my co-founder best friend, and the closest thing I had to a sister. Noah didn't hesitate. She flew in from Boston, signed the paperwork, fought for every procedure. She stayed by my bedside. She made sure I wasn't alone. By the end of the week, I was breathing without the ventilator. My brain had stabilized. I wasn't fully conscious, but I was there, alive. The Monroes didn't return, but they did show up at my grandmother Lorraine's house the following Friday. I watched the footage later, Clarence pacing on the porch, Ivy tugging at her pearls, impatient with the locksmith. Delilah, my sister by law, and Silence stood awkwardly behind them, her expression unreadable. They had come to claim what Lorraine left me, but the door didn't open for them. They didn't find furniture or heirlooms or keys. Just a single letter waiting on the dining room table, a letter that would ruin everything they had tried to preserve. We lived in a white colonial on a quiet street in Saratoga Springs, the kind with hydrangeas out front and perfectly symmetrical shutters that matched the mailbox. From the outside, we looked like the kind of family that sent holiday cards in matching outfits, and we did. Clarence and Ivy Monroe. My parents were pillars of the community. He wore three-piece suits even on Saturdays and had a laugh that echoed through fundraising galas. She hosted garden parties and spoke in compliments that felt more like critiques. Then there was Delilah, blonde, brilliant, and impossible not to love. Even her tantrums felt like declarations of spirit. I was the quiet one, the rule follower, the one who color-coded her folders and said please without reminders. In every school photo, Delilah's head was tilted like she owned the frame. Mine was always slightly off-center, smiling just enough. Delilah got the bigger bedroom. She got the last cookie. She got the seat by the window on every family vacation. My artwork was filed in drawers. Hers lived proudly on the refrigerator until the tape gave out. Once I asked why she always picked the restaurant on Friday nights. "Your sister needs more encouragement," Clarence had said. "You don't." When I won the regional spelling bee in 5th grade, Ivy barely looked up from her tea. "Of course you did," she said. "You always do well." I used to think that meant I was their favorite. That being easy, reliable, efficient meant I was loved. But love shouldn't feel like performance. The truth came when I was 12. It was past midnight and I'd crept downstairs for a glass of water. Their voices drifted in from the kitchen, sharp, tense. "You've always favored Delilah," my mother snapped. "It's like you're trying to make up for the fact that Evelyn's not really yours." "She's not yours either, Ivy," my father replied. We agreed we'd never treat her differently. The glass slipped from my fingers and shattered on the tile. Silence. Then footsteps. I ran to my room and dove under the covers just before Ivy opened the door. She stood there for a moment watching, then closed it without a word. The next morning, I stirred my cereal, slowly waiting. "I heard you last night," I said. Clarence didn't look up from his paper. Ivy poured her coffee. "I know I'm adopted." There was a pause. Ivy smiled that tight, immaculate smile that never reached her eyes. "Don't be ridiculous, Evelyn. You must have dreamed it." And that was that. No confirmation, no denial, just gaslighting and breakfast as usual. It was the day I learned truth mattered less in our home than the performance of it. After that, I tried harder to be perfect, harder to be needed, harder to earn what should have been unconditional. Because if I couldn't be loved for who I was, maybe I could be kept for what I achieved. After that night in the kitchen, I became obsessed with achievement. Not just good grades, perfect ones. Not just trophies, state titles. I didn't just want my parents to notice. I needed them to look at me and see something they couldn't dismiss. I graduated top of my class, gave the valedictorian speech in a crisp navy blazer Ivy picked, but never complimented. I got into MIT, full ride. When I called home, Ivy said, "Well, you always were efficient." At graduation they came. Clarence clapped exactly 3 times during my speech. Ivy wore sunglasses the entire ceremony, even indoors. They smiled for the camera, shook hands with my professors, and left early for dinner reservations with Delilah. It didn't matter. I was building something bigger than their approval. At 22, I co-founded a health tech startup with Noah, my best friend from undergrad. We designed diagnostic software that could detect rare conditions from voice patterns and eye movements, something fast, something accessible, something human. The company took off. Investors' panels, features in Forbes. My parents attended the launch gala. Clarence gave a toast about raising daughters who lead. Ivy wore her pearls and called me Evelyn Grace all night like I was a resume come to life. Only one person ever saw me as more than what I produced. Grandma Lorraine. She lived in Albany in a creaky Victorian full of books and the smell of cinnamon. Widowed young, she'd raised Clarence with a firm voice and gentle eyes. She'd invite me every summer from middle school on after I learned about the adoption and made space for me in a way no one else did. "You read like your mother," she said once, handing me a tattered copy of Jane Eyre. Always lost in thought but fiercely bright. I asked who my mother was. She paused, then said, "Someone who loved you very much but wasn't ready. Someday I'll tell you everything." Someday kept getting delayed. Then came Thanksgiving. 3 years ago. We were all there, me, Delilah, Clarence, Ivy, and Lorraine, who'd grown thinner but no less sharp. The conversation turned to my company's Series A funding. Lorraine beamed. "I always knew Evelyn would do something extraordinary." "She's always been determined to prove herself," Ivy replied, sipping her wine. I stared at her. "Is that what you think I've been doing?" "Isn't it?" Clarence said. "Most adopted children go through a phase of overachievement. It's common." Delilah dropped her fork. I set my napkin down. "You denied it for years." "We thought it was better that way," Ivy said, already moving on to the cranberry sauce. Lorraine slammed her hand on the table. "That's enough, Ivy." But it wasn't. I stood. My voice shook. "You never wanted me. You wanted a daughter who made you look good, not one who needed you." Then I left. I didn't call. I didn't return messages. I changed my number. Lorraine was the only one I still saw every Sunday without fail. She was the last place that still felt like home. It was raining the night everything changed. That soft, steady kind of rain that turns familiar roads into blurred mirrors. I stayed too late at the office. We were prepping a major update and I didn't want to leave it unfinished. Noah told me to head home around 8. I didn't listen. 15 minutes from my apartment, a car ran the light at Halston in Maine. They told me later it hit the driver's side at 60 miles an hour. I don't remember the sound, only the silence after the kind that hums like a dial tone inside your head. I was told the paramedics had to cut me out of the wreckage, that my ribs were fractured, my collarbone shattered, that I had bleeding in the brain and pressure behind my eyes. I was unconscious by the time I reached the ER, and that's where I stayed, unmoving, intubated alone. At 2:12 a.m., the hospital called the emergency contacts in my phone. Clarence and Ivy Monroe. They came. They looked at me covered in blood and machines. And then they left. "She's not actually our daughter," Clarence told the attending physician. "It was informal. The paperwork never went through." "She's not our responsibility," Ivy added. "We can't authorize anything. They didn't ask if I was in pain. They didn't ask what I needed. They asked about costs. Without their authorization, the surgery couldn't proceed." That's when Nurse Celeste stepped in. She called Noah. Noah arrived an hour later, soaking wet and wide-eyed. She signed the consent forms. She called our company lawyer. She sat beside my bed reading from our project proposals like I was still in the conference room with her. Celeste checked my vitals and whispered updates to me during each shift change. She played music I might like. She said, "You're not alone," even though I was. Legally, I was a Monroe. But that night my parents told the hospital I wasn't. They chose the lie that let them walk away. And I would have died with that lie if it hadn't been for Noah Celeste and the kind of family you don't inherit, you build. Waking up felt like being dragged through glass. My throat burned from the breathing tube, my limbs refused to cooperate, and the pain in my head came in waves I couldn't brace for. Everything hurt, but I was alive. Noah was there when I opened my eyes. So was Celeste, holding a warm washcloth and whispering, "Hey, you made it!" I couldn't speak, but I blinked once. That was enough. They stayed. Recovery was slow. I couldn't sit up without vomiting for days. Even blinking too fast made the room spin. But I pushed through, because somewhere deep down beneath the bruises and broken bones I remembered. I remembered my parents walking out. A week after I was transferred to a quieter ward, Noah brought news Lorraine had passed, peacefully in her sleep 6 months earlier. I hadn't known. Ivy and Clarence never told me. What I did receive was a letter from Mr. Grayson, Lorraine's attorney. He arrived in a charcoal suit and a soft voice carrying a sealed envelope and a thin folder of legal documents. "Your grandmother asked me to deliver this personally should anything happen to her before she could speak to you directly." Inside the envelope was a letter in Lorraine's handwriting. She explained everything. My birth mother had been her niece Caroline, just 18 when she got pregnant. The father disappeared. Lorraine offered a solution adoption within the family. Her son Clarence and his wife Ivy had been struggling to conceive. It seemed like fate. What she hadn't foreseen was that Ivy would become pregnant with Delilah just weeks after taking me home. 2 infants. One theirs. One not. Lorraine had watched the distance grow over the years. She'd confronted Clarence about it more than once. He always promised to do better. They never did. The adoption had been fully legal. Every paper filed, every document signed. I was theirs in name and law. They knew. But knowing and accepting aren't the same. Mr. Grayson slid a second envelope across the tray table. "They've filed for emergency conservatorship," he said. "They're claiming you're mentally unfit to manage Lorraine's estate." I stared at the name on the petition, Evelyn Monroe, respondent. They'd left me to die. And now they were trying to take what she left me. Not for love, for power. But they didn't know about the letter, or what I was about to do with it. I got stronger faster than anyone expected. Pain was still there, but it no longer owned me. My steps were slow, my arm still in a sling, but I had something bigger than recovery driving me the truth. Lorraine's house. My house was still in probate, but I had access. Mr. Grayson arranged it. I hired a security firm to change the locks and install cameras in every room. "You'll be able to monitor it remotely," the technician said. That was the point. Next came the letter. It took me 3 drafts to get it right. The first was too angry. The second, too clinical. The third was what I needed, a declaration, not a confrontation. I didn't need them to feel remorse. I needed them to see what they'd done in a mirror they couldn't shatter. I included copies of the hospital report, legal proof of my adoption, in Lorraine's letter. I added a line, "The cameras are recording." The day the Monroes arrived, I watched from Noah's apartment. At precisely 2:07 p.m., Ivy's car pulled into the driveway. Clarence stepped out first, checking his watch. Delilah lingered behind them, eyes scanning the porch like she already knew something was off. They tried the front door. Locked. Called a locksmith. Signed a release. Walked in like they owned it. Clarence went upstairs. Ivy beelined for the china cabinet. Delilah stood still in the hallway until her gaze landed on the envelope waiting on the dining room table. Ivy opened it. As she read, her face drained of color. Clarence came down with a vase in hand, took one look at the papers, and turned red. Delilah read over her mother's shoulder. Her expression didn't shift. It collapsed. I watched it all in real time. No sound, just movement. The moment the performance cracked. And that was when I knew the truth didn't need to scream to be heard. The text came 3 days after they read the letter. "Delilah, can we talk? Just us." I didn't know Evelyn. I swear I didn't know. I stared at the screen for a long time before answering. Tomorrow. 10 a.m. Cambridge Street Cafe. She was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table 2 coffees in front of her. She stood when she saw me, then sat again awkwardly. We hadn't spoken in 3 years. You still take it black with 1 sugar, she said, pushing a cup toward me. I do. I took a sip and waited. I don't know where to start, she admitted. What they said at the hospital. I can't believe it. But they did. I know. I saw the footage. And the letter. She paused, looking down. I think part of me always knew something was wrong, but I didn't want to see it. I told myself you were just more independent, that they were harder on you because you were older, or I let her sit in the silence. She didn't try to fill it this time. I'm sorry, she said finally, for not asking questions, for being quiet when you needed someone to say something. I was their golden girl. I didn't want to lose that. I nodded slowly. Small steps, Delilah. That's all I can offer right now. I'll take them, she said. 2 weeks later, she moved into Lorraine's East Wing, said it was temporary. I didn't ask for a timeline. The Monroes filed one more desperate move, a lawsuit for emotional distress. Claimed the letter and the footage defamed them, ruined their standing in the community. It went to court. The judge dismissed it with prejudice, called it an attempt to silence documented truth. The story made local news. Former colleagues, country club friends, neighbors. Their faces stopped appearing in the local paper. Their names vanished from charity lists. Eventually, they moved to Florida. No goodbye, no apology. But I wasn't waiting for one anymore. Delilah brought dinner the night the verdict came down. Takeout from the Thai place Lorraine used to love. She set the bag on the counter, glanced at the still-sealed envelope of court documents, and smiled faintly. Congratulations, she said. For what I asked. For finally being done with them. I looked at the empty spaces where the Monroes used to live in my mind and realized she was right. The noise had gone quiet. 1 year later, the dining room glowed in the way I remembered from childhood, warm, golden humming with soft voices and the clink of silverware. The table was full again, not with people I owed loyalty to by law or blood, but with those who had shown up when it mattered most. Noah laughed across from me, swirling her wine and retelling a story from our early startup days when we nearly lost our first client because I refused to accept a typo in the proposal. Celeste rolled her eyes and passed the bread. You were in a coma and still more organized than half the hospital, she said. Delilah smiled from the end of the table, quieter than usual, but steady. She'd found her own rhythm in the East Wing. It wasn't always easy, we still tripped over old habits, but the foundation was different now. Honest, intentional. Mr. Grayson was there too, seated beside the fireplace. He looked around the room and said Lorraine would have liked this, especially the company. The house had been restored, updated plumbing, fresh paint, a new roof, but I kept the original moldings, the creaky floorboards, the lavender wallpaper in Lorraine's reading room. I wanted it to feel like her, like memory without the pain. Upstairs, my office was no longer filled with startup prototypes. Now it housed sketches and notes for a new project, Bridge Voice, a communication tool for patients with brain injuries who couldn't speak but were still aware. We were testing eye tracking patterns and neural responses, anything that could help doctors understand when someone was still inside. I knew I said once to Noah I was still there. I just couldn't make them see it. Now, maybe we could help someone else be seen. The night wore on with seconds that didn't have to be earned, just shared. Delilah helped me clear the plates. Celeste stayed to help box up leftovers. Grayson left with a wave, promising to return next Sunday. Noah hugged me like she always did, tight and certain. Later, when the house was quiet, I stepped out onto the porch. Fireflies blinked lazily across the yard like they always had when I was a girl curled up beside Lorraine on the swing. Room for one more, Delilah asked behind me. I nodded and she sat beside me. We didn't speak. We just rocked together slowly like we had all the time in the world.